Hey everyone. It's been a while since I posted anything on this channel, and this video is not exactly going to be anything new. I'm going to use an analogy that I've used over and over in my previous videos, but I wanted to have one video that is specifically focused on the question of what is theology, philosophy, and science, what exactly they are and how they work. And I wanted to have it as an independent, shareable video. So that's why I'm putting this together. All right, so my old analogy of a concrete room. So imagine this massive room with really thick concrete walls, no doors and no windows. So let's just say that you were drugged, you were kidnapped, and you wake up in this concrete room, and you have no idea how you got there, who put you there, or anything like that. So it's a complete epistemic reset, if you want to say more technically. So you wake up, and the question is, what can you do? What can you know? What can you figure out with just this one massive empty room with really thick walls? So basically, human knowledge depends on two things: our senses and our reason. So it's either each one of these work independently, or they work together to come up with some understanding of what's going on. And in this case, if we start with our senses, so basically, you're gonna go around the room and you're gonna look to see if there's any openings. You're gonna try to probably hammer the walls to see if you can find a weak spot. You're gonna put your ear to the wall to see if you hear anything outside of it. You're gonna try to look for cracks, holes, anything that you could see outside, but there's nothing there. You feel around. You basically all the senses available to you that you try to use, you're not able to do or to see anything outside the room, and you have no idea where you are, and you essentially you've used your senses to try to make sense or to figure out something about your situation, and you've acquired no additional information. Okay, so then the next thing you have at your disposal is your reason. But reason is very different than your sense in that it's not really giving you information about the room, direct information, but it's allowing you to speculate about possible reasons for what's going on. So, you might say, oh, okay, maybe I've been kidnapped for ransom. Maybe this is some kind of practical joke. You might start to think, hey, do I have any crazy friends that are gonna like want to play a trick on me and put me in a room like this and see how I react? Maybe this is a scientific experiment. Maybe there's some kind of crazy scientist out there that's trying to figure out how humans behave in a situation like this. Or maybe it's one of those weird online game shows where, super rich people are paying money to see what happens to a person after they get put in a room for hours and hours and all that stuff. Anyway, those are possibilities, and you kind of run them through your head. You consider the likelihood of each one and the implications of each one. If it's a scientific experiment, maybe they're gonna come in and check on you, or maybe they're observing you. If it's something else, uh, maybe like if it's a ransom, they might contact your family, and your family might pay the ransom and get you out and things like that. So your reason, your senses are what you have available to you. There's really nothing else you could do, and they work very differently in helping you trying to get some information about what's going on. Okay, now um, these more or less are analogies or reflect how science and philosophy works. So science, it's basically like our senses. It's an extension of our senses, and it works with the physical world by trying to understand it, by trying to study it. Um, we're essentially kind of in this situation in the sense that we've woken up on this planet that's hurtling through space, and we don't really know why we're here, how we got here, or anything like that, and we're trying to figure things out. And we can use science, to observe things around us, telescopes, microscopes, all these different things to help us to understand our situation. And then philosophy as well is a way of knowing, but it uses reason, and people speculate about the possibilities of how we got here. Maybe there's a God, maybe there isn't a God. if there is a God, maybe he created things this way, or if he created things some other way, and what are the implications of each of these possibilities. So we have these tools at our disposal to try to understand our situation as human beings. So where exactly does theology come into play here? Theology is this idea that, okay, let's just say we have a 50-50 probability that there's a God, right? But in the situation that maybe there is a God, this God doesn't have the same epistemic restrictions or epistemic limitations that we do. We're kind of stuck in this room and we cannot see outside of it. But in my analogy here, the person that put us into the room, they could probably get us back out, right? They found a way to get us in there. Maybe they have a way to get us out, or maybe they have a way to communicate with us. So they don't have the same epistemic limitations that we do, and they could provide us with information about our situation. So in the room analogy, maybe the person who kidnapped us has some kind of speaker in the room that they could talk to us and tell us, hey, here's why I put you in the room, here's what you need to do, here's what's going to happen, things like that. And of course, they could be lying to us, or maybe we could misunderstand them. So there's a whole other set of issues that apply to this other possible way for us to acquire knowledge, which is through some kind of revelation from outside of our predicament. So in the real world, if God exists, this God can try to communicate with us, and there might be different ways to do it. So there are publicly accessible ways like scripture, the community of believers, maybe there's prophets, maybe there's miracles, or there could also be personal ways like providence. Maybe God can work in our lives in a way where we're sensing his guidance. And again, there's issues here as well, because we got to figure out which of these what modes of communication God might be using, and then having to interpret them and things like that. So again, the difference between these things is that philosophy and science are essentially things we can do to figure out our own predicament, while theology is the possibility that somebody else outside our own predicament could communicate with us and give us information. So there's something of a difference on how all these three elements work. Okay, so coming back to science now, there's certain things about how science works that we need to keep in mind. So science, if we go to the graph on the left here, science has a progressive increase in certainty depending on how much data we have available. So if we conduct some experiment and we start with a small sample size, 10, 100, our certainty is relatively limited. So we might get some results, but we cannot be confident in our results. But if we increase the sample size, the bigger the sample size, we might get to 1,000, then we could have kind of a workable level of confidence. We could say, yeah, it's fairly, I think it's fairly certain that our conclusions are true, so we can go forward with these conclusions. But then if we keep increasing our sample size and we keep gathering data, and the data keeps confirming whatever it is we're testing here, then we could increase to a level of fairly high certainty. In science, we never quite reach 100% certainty, but we can get to a very high level of certainty because, maybe we've tested 10,000 or 100,000 different samples, and they all seem to behave the same way. So we can have fairly high certainty in our results. So that's one thing about science. The certainty level increases depending on the data and the evidence available. The other thing about science is that at any given time, there is a sphere of knowledge in which we can have high confidence, like we just said. There might be another sphere of knowledge in which we have workable confidence, and then there's yet another sphere of knowledge that we could and we probably will at some point figure out, but at this point we don't know anything about. But then there's the possibility of another layer, and this layer is usually called metaphysics, which no matter how far we would progress in science cannot actually access it. So because of the nature of how science works, because science interacts with the material world, maybe there's a layer of existence outside this spatio-temporal reality that we're in, And if that's the case, science as a methodology wouldn't give us access to it. So it's essentially kind of a dark area that we couldn't reach. So just to give an example of what something like this would be, um, from what I can tell right now, scientists think that we can observe about 5% of the actual universe. So within the Big Bang model, as the universe is basically increasing in size in all directions, with our best telescopes and our best tools available, there's some area that we can observe around us, but then scientists assume that the universe is actually much bigger than that. So we might have high confidence about things very close to us. So we might know a lot about the planets within our immediate solar system. And then as we move out from the center, we might know less and less about things within our immediate area here. But then there's certain things that are outside the observable universe that we know nothing about at this point in time. But as our tools improve, so as technology increases and improves, and we have better telescopes and better ways of looking far away, the observable part of our universe will increase in size and will go deeper and deeper and see further and further. So hypothetically speaking, it's possible that 1,000 years in the future, 10,000 years in the future, we might be able to have access to all this knowledge that at this point in time we have no access to. But the nature of science is such that at any given time, there's certain things he knows well and certain things he has, somewhat relative knowledge about, and then certain things that he cannot access. And there's certain things possibly that exist that he cannot access even in theory, even when we have all the technology imaginable. Okay, so the other thing about science is the way it interacts, the way it's essentially science studies the material world. So if there is such a thing as a supernatural, or if there is such a thing as metaphysics, and if this supernatural in any way interacts with material reality, science doesn't have a good way to look into it, because the only thing science can do is it can propose naturalistic hypotheses and study them. So in science, you have the process is this: you come up with a naturalistic hypothesis, you make predictions, you go out and study those predictions. If the data confirms your predictions, then that is something in favor of your hypothesis. So you go back and you do more research, and you kind of enter this cycle where the more research you do, the more data you gather. And if the data keeps confirming your hypothesis becomes more and more certain. But if the data contradicts your hypothesis, then you might go back to the beginning and say, okay, that naturalistic hypothesis didn't work, so let's come up with a different naturalistic hypothesis. But you're always looking for naturalistic hypothesis in science. And the only way theoretically you could ever get to a supernaturalistic hypothesis for any given situation is by exhausting the naturalistic hypotheses, which in practice doesn't really happen. So, because even if you did run out of hypotheses, you might just say, well, maybe 20 years from now, I'll come up with something better. So you never really run out of naturalistic hypotheses. So another issue with science is that it always has it tends to have a naturalistic bias, basically. It's always looking for naturalistic hypotheses, and sometimes it finds them even when they're wrong. So even when a hypothesis is actually wrong, sometimes we don't know that it's going to be wrong for maybe decades or even centuries to come until we gather sufficient data to tell that the hypothesis is wrong. But in the meantime, we go on with our science thinking the hypothesis was correct all along, when in reality it wasn't. So those are some limitations of science. When it comes to philosophy, again, philosophy is speculation. So, philosophy is a way to, it's an attempt to access metaphysics. And here are some possible elements regarding metaphysics. So basically, first you have the possibility that God exists or God doesn't exist. Then if God exists, is God one with the world, like in pantheism? Is the world a part of God, like in panentheism? Or is God separate from the world, like in classical theism. So those are some metaphysical possibilities when it comes to God, and that's just some of them. There's many other questions that we could ask regarding God and his interaction with the world. Regarding the world itself, there's different models of how the world be. So you have idealism, monism, Platonic dualism, Aristotelian dualism, Cartesian dualism. So idealism says that the material world doesn't exist. So basically, it just takes it says the world is supernatural, but we perceive it as material. Um, Monism says that there's only the material sphere. There's no supernatural or immaterial sphere. Platonic dualism has both a material and an immaterial sphere side by side. Aristotelian dualism has a material sphere where the individual elements in this material sphere have an immaterial component. And then Cartesian dualism just separates minds from bodies. So everything is physical except the mind, pretty much. And then you come to man, and it's that same question: is man a material being, or does man have a soul? Regarding knowledge, there's different theories about how knowledge occurs depending on different assumptions about the nature of reality. So somebody who comes from a Platonic perspective will say, knowledge might be by recollection. So our souls are somehow connected to the immaterial world, and basically the way we learn is by as we experience things in the real world, our souls are remembering things from within the immaterial world and making sense of it that way. The Aristotle's alternative to that is abstraction, to where we study objects and we study the material side of them, and then we infer or deduct things about the immaterial side of them, and then we extrapolate and learn about the immaterial world from the material world. So that might fall. Sometimes it's referred to as natural theology. Now, on this other side, where people no longer either don't believe in this duality or this immaterial aspect of reality, or they don't think it's accessible, then knowledge happens by cultural conditioning. So we're born in a family, we're born in a culture, and we're taught different things, and we learn that way, as opposed to remembering them, or as opposed to deducing things from the objects around us. All right, so those are some metaphysical questions. And again, all these things, we cannot really prove them because we have no access to metaphysics directly. So we have to speculate about what the different possibilities are, and essentially just go from there. Just come up with a list of possible scenarios that could be behind the scenes. All right, so then with theology, again, first there's the issue of religion, which religion is correct: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, or something else. There's thousands of religions. These are just the main ones. The scriptures that we use is the Bible, the Quran, the Book of Mormon, or many other scriptures available. Even if we stick with the Bible, there's still debates about, what exactly is the Bible? Do we include the Apocrypha, or do we not include the Apocrypha, or some other books that are available? Even once we settle on just one specific version of the Bible, there's issues of interpretation. Catholics interpret the Bible through the church. So the church is the authorized interpreter. Protestants interpret the Bible through the lens of the church fathers, the first 200-300 years of Christian tradition. Fundamentalists take everything literally. The New Orthodox say that the Bible is only inspired in as much as it points to Christ. So the only inspired parts of the Bible are the things that are focusing on Christ and his ministry and his mission and so on. Liberals say, well, the Bible is just inspirational. It's just supposed to make you think of God, and you read it and then you reflect, and that helps you have your own relationship with God. It doesn't have truth content necessarily. Like, it's not telling you anything else about the world. It's just helping you inspire. Excuse me. It's just inspiring you to have your own relationship with God. And then Adventists have somewhat of a different model about how this works as well. And I've spent most of my time on this channel discussing that. So those are different issues that we have to deal with within the sphere of theology. So again, there's challenges with each one of these, and unfortunately, this is all we have to work with. So with science, science is incomplete. It is always improving and increasing, but there's still a lot we don't know, and a lot of times we don't even know what we don't know. We don't know how much there is left to know, and how much we haven't figured out yet. And then science doesn't have access to metaphysics, so even the things we do know in science are just about our own material universe. We don't know anything about if there's anything beyond the material universe. With philosophy, it's speculation. There's possibilities, but we don't have a way to prove which of the possibilities is correct. And with theology, there's the issue of, yeah, maybe God did communicate with humanity, but which one of the different claims of such communication, which one is the correct one? Did it speak to Muhammad? Did it speak to uh, people in other religions and so on? And then even if we do settle on one and say, well, we think Christianity is the most plausible, again, how do we interpret Christianity? How to interpret the sacred texts, all those different things, because there's different ways to do it. So all these are questions that exist in each one of these three different methods of that humans have to access knowledge and to learn about who they are and what reality is about. And they're all incomplete and they all have their challenges. And this is what we have to work with and do the best we can to make sense of them.